What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I hope you guys are staying safe and you've been doing well since the last time I posted. Now, today's video is about the cadaver synod that happened in 9th century when Pope Formosus, who had been dead for 7 months, had his body uninterred from St. Peter's Basilica, dressed in papal vestments, and put on trial. Now, I watched a number of different videos on this platform, all of them which were really good, that were just really talking about the synod itself. They mentioned some of the politics, some of the other beefing going around surrounding it, but I was like, man, the story of how we got to that point, the story of how we get from this guy that became pope and was ascended to the highest office that a Catholic can hope to achieve, to the point where 7 months after he died, someone decided, do you know what's a great idea? Let's go get old bro's body, dress him up so I can yell at it for an afternoon. That sounds like a great idea. So the story of how we got from, him as a young boy to becoming Catholic to becoming Archbishop and then becoming Pope is just as fascinating to me as to how we got to the point where 7 months after his death, they decided to do this to him. So without any further ado, let's dive into today's story, so, shall we? Now, our story starts 9th century Italy, somewhere around 816 or so. Some sources say Formosus was born a little earlier. Other sources say he was born a little later. But most of the ones I saw all said about 816. Now, he was definitely born in Rome. We can't prove that as a fact. But if you weren't an Italian male at the time, you weren't getting anywhere near the office of the papacy. So if he wasn't either born in Rome, it would have been Rome adjacent, essentially. And that's really all we know about his youth and about his young life until he becomes Archbishop of Porto in 864. Now, I wish I knew more about his youth because that might help us to understand more of the story and maybe understand more of his politics and all this stuff, which definitely plays into it. And I'll explain that in just a minute. But we don't know anything until 864. So he's like 40, 50 years old, depending on when you believe he was born, when he becomes archbishop. And there's obviously nothing of note, either really good or really bad, that has happened to him to the point where it got noted down. So he's obviously been living his life all right. So he could then become an archbishop as he starts to get older. Now, fast forward, let me just double check my notes here, 2 years in 866. So he's been a bishop for 2 years, and he gets sent to Bulgaria with another bishop. Now, I don't know what he does in Bulgaria specifically that so endears him to the prince and so endears him to the local people. But he gets so endeared to the prince and the local people that they ask the Pope at the time for him to become Archbishop of Bulgaria. Now he's already Archbishop of Porto, so they go, no, you can't be Archbishop of more than one place at a time. Now you would think that's where it ends. Like, all right, we asked for him to also be Archbishop. We really like this guy. That's where it ends. But no, that Pope passes away. They then asked the next Pope the same thing. Hey, we really like old bro. Can he be Archbishop of our area as well? And then the Catholic Church goes, nah, can't do that. Can't be Archbishop of more than one place. So apparently the only person that can have power in the Catholic Church is the Pope. It is what it is. So the fact that they asked twice, they asked the first Pope, that Pope died. They asked again, to me, shows the level of respect and admiration they had for Formosus. Because if you didn't do that, you're not going to ask the next dude who takes over the office the same question as you asked the previous dude. You're just not going to do that, at least in my opinion. So fast forward to 872. He gets sent to East Francia because Louis II and his wife had no male heir. Because he's obviously really important because he's getting sent on these ambassadorships trying to either further spread the gospel or help with these male heirs and help with domestic strife between kings and empresses. He's obviously really important, and he's risen up and respected to a point where he's getting sent on these diplomatic missions. Now, unfortunately, Louis dies, so he doesn't obviously spend too much time in that dealing with that particular issue because uh, Louis II dies. Now in 875, when he dies, so a few years later, uh, he gets sent by the next pope. Now, a little side note on the popes here: there's a number of popes involved in the story because in the ninth century, there was about 22 different individuals that held the office of pope. So I'm trying to distinguish here between Pope A, Pope B, and Pope C. But compared to the 20th century, when I believe there was only what 9 people that held the office of the pope, that's a lot bigger of a number. So in 875, Louis dies. I don't know what happened with the malaria situation. Obviously, nothing good happened because he goes, all right, the Pope goes, all right, Formosus, I need you to go extend an invitation to Charles the Bald to become king. And he goes, all right, that's my job. I'll do it. But Formosus was a part of another larger group within the office of the church that did not approve of Charles the Bald as king. I'm pretty sure they all had different reasons. They all had their own thoughts behind why they did not want that to happen. But he obviously does this. He extends the invitation. Charles the Bald gets crowned king. Now he is in such fear for his life because he does not want Charles the Bald to be king. He wants Louis's former empress, whose name I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce, to become empress. Now, we all know that historically speaking, politics, being on the wrong side of politics and having political opinions that are different from, the king of the ruling class or the pope can get you stabbed with a very sharp object a number of times in a consecutive manner. That's just what it is. And he was obviously in such fear of his life. He goes, I'm piecing out of Rome. I don't want to get stabbed. I don't want to get crucified. Y'all are tripping. Peace. And then the Pope goes, all right, you can't just do that. You got to come back to Rome. And he essentially goes, nah, son, I'm not coming back to Rome. I'm not, I don't trust you guys. I don't think that you're not going to kill me. So here's one of the biggest controversies of this thing. He gets in, let me double check the date here. In 878, he gets excommunicated. Now, the debate on the excommunication is whether or not his excommunication was lifted basically for an oath that he took to basically serve as a layman for the rest of his life and not return to Rome, which, in my opinion, just complicates the entire matter of not wanting to do it around in the first place. Because, in my opinion, the excommunications is just an easier method of being like, all right, we don't like this guy. We don't want anything to do with him. Let's just wash our hands of him and be done. I think that's just the easier method than excommunicating him and then not excommunicating him just on the promise of not returning to Rome and not being a bishop. That's just how I see it. I could be wrong. Let me know what you think in the comments. Now, fast forward a couple of years to 883. Now, the next pope, Pope Marinus, I think is how you pronounce his name, recalls him to Rome. Now, if he was still actually excommunicated, like officially excommunicated, popes have the power to undo excommunications of previous popes. So, as an example, if I was pope and I excommunicate my neighbor, and one of you becomes pope afterwards, you can be like, he only excommunicated him because he didn't cut his grass and he let it grow too long. That's a stupid reason to excommunicate somebody. I'm going to unexcommunicate him. You, as the Pope, have the power to undo the excommunications that I did during my time as Pope. And that's important there. So whether he was excommunicated or not, this Pope has the power to be like, all right, welcome you back with open arms. Let's all be chill here. Now there is a historian here whose name I wrote down, who is Kirsch, I believe, who basically says one of the reasons that he believes that he may have also been excommunicated is that Formosus was a contender for the papacy as early as 872. And the gentleman that won the office of the papacy obviously may have felt some sort of way that this guy who had been rising through the ranks was almost that close to ascending to the office of the pope, and this guy was obviously not comfortable and secure in his position enough to not be worried about that. That's just one particular historian's theory on an extra reason for some of these beefs happening here. Now, he's he's quiet from 883 to his election to the papacy in 891. He doesn't really do much. He doesn't, to my knowledge, doesn't really go on many of these foreign excursions. He's just we're doing his job, holding the archbishop seat, whatever else he's doing. Then in 891 he becomes pope. Now we can look at other popes, and a lot of certain popes throughout the centuries have focused on more spiritual and ecclesiastical things. Like they have said things about gay marriage, said things about women in the church. They held like Vatican II, whatever it is. You think of all the big spiritual things that these different popes have done. Now, Formosus's reign was not about that. He seems to be, at least from my perspective, a guy that was focused on securing the independence of the church and of the papacy. Like, hey, we don't bow down to Rome. We don't answer to this empire or that empire with all the craziness that is the politics of the region at the time and people invading and all this sort of stuff. He's going, all right, we need to secure the future of this and not be held in any particular person's pocket. Now he seems to spend a lot of his time not just kicking this person out and having to deal with these foreign invaders into Italy. He spends a lot of his time having to deal with the Spoleto and the Spoleto family. Now, if you don't know who that is, basically think pre-Medici family. Now, we all know that the power and the influence that the Medici family had on Italy and politics and on the papacy. Just think something along those lines and all that terribleness and the corruption and all that stuff just beforehand. As the simplest way that I've been able to understand how to communicate that. Just all of that crap going on just in earlier centuries. Now, he obviously did not like this. Now, Stephen VI, who is the Pope that would held the Cadaver Synod, did not like the fact that he was basically anti-Spoleto. He was also one of the people that favored Charles the Bald's coronation as king. So they got these major beefs going on. I didn't find any sort of like spiritual disbeliefs, like they had disbeliefs on the Eucharist or transubstantiation or their belief of women in places of power within the church. I didn't find any of that. It all seems to be political, behind the scenes beef, which now that we know in the 21st century, unfortunately, political beefs still happen. It just is what it is. So he is Pope until 896. Now you would think his enemies could breathe a sigh of relief, going, all right, dude's dead. We can just move on and move in the direction that we want to move in and undo the things that we don't like that he did. Now, that would be the smart play here. Hey, we want to erase this dude from history. We can't erase the fact that he was Pope, but let's undo a lot of the things that he did so we can take this group in a direction that we wanted to move it. That's not what happens. The dude is dead for 7 months. His body is interred at St. Peter's Basilica. Now, his enemies are so pissed at him, and Stephen VI goes, all right, I got to do something here. So he holds the Cadaver Synod. He uninterrs his body from St. Peter's Basilica, dresses him up in full papal vestments, pops him in a chair, puts a young bishop next to him to act as his voice, because obviously bro's dead. He can't be his own voice. So, and he basically starts yelling at him. He accuses him of usurping the papacy, ascending to the papacy illegally, holding offices illegally, which is connected to his excommunication. And that's basically saying, hey, you were excommunicated. You didn't have the right to become bishop, then become pope, basically invalidating everything he did after coming back into the church, after saying, okay, you were excommunicated on X date, so everything you did afterwards is null and void. So he obviously gets found guilty of all these charges and all the hate and all this. I'm pretty sure there were other charges and other things they were yelling at him. They just didn't document. Now they tear the vestments from his body. They chop off the three fingers on his right hand that he used for like blessings. I'm guessing it probably represents Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I could be wrong. Three and one makes sense to me. And then they toss his body initially into a grave for commoners. But a few days later, they toss his body into the Tiber River. Now, I guess in a sense of what some might call karmic justice, I just, whatever you want to call that. A few months later in 897, so summertime, maybe a little early fall, Stephen the Sixth gets strangled to death. Now, a few subsequent popes after Stephen the Sixth look at this whole situation and go, this is nuts. We can't have this. If we want people to view the church as legitimate, we can't be doing things like digging up dead popes so we can yell at them because we didn't like them. So so multiple popes go, okay, but he did was wrong, and everything Moses did and all the things that he wrote are back in place. We are going to bring back the people that were in the offices that he may have installed into different offices. We recognize Moses as a pope and as someone in the papal succession. He didn't ascend to the papacy illegally. He didn't do anything wrong as far as wrong enough to be able to say, okay, he usurped the papacy or anything like that. So that's how it stands now. To my knowledge, officially, the Catholic Church views Formosus as a legitimate pope within what they view as their papal line of succession. Now, I don't remember when I first saw this video, but like I said at the beginning, this is just incredibly fascinating. I like history, and even if you're not Catholic, because I'm not Catholic, a lot of what happens within history with stuff tied to the Catholic Church is incredibly fascinating, whether you're religious or not, because they had so much influence over so many centuries and so many places. They're tied to so many major world events, and it's just incredibly fascinating to take a look at these. So if you have any other stories, whether they be similar stories within Catholic history or just true crime, sports, anything, let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, hit like. Let me know what you think about the Cadaver Synod. Was it just wild? Do you agree with it? And in the meantime, subscribe to the channel so you're always updated for future videos. Follow me on X. You can friend me on Facebook as well. I'm on Instagram, but those are personal pages. They aren't pages dedicated to delivering content to you. So just as a side note to you. So just until next time, guys, have fun and stay safe.